In the last few minutes of the lesson, Kath patrolled the class, and pupils continued to work in silence. There was no expectation that a plenary was coming up. Pupils were distracted by her movement. Checking on her whereabouts prevented them from concentrating fully on their learning. As she walked around, the bell rang. At the sound of the bell, pupils began to get ready to leave. Kath pointed out that the bell was a signal to her, not to them.
That bell's for me, not for you.
They groaned and reluctantly settled down again, anxious about being late for the next lesson. At this point, Kath had not explained the criteria for pupils being allowed to leave. On behalf of herself and others, Anita raised her hand to ask if those who had finished could go. She was worried about being late for Mr. Brooks' lesson. Kath's sarcastic response upset Anita, who had completed all her work and was taking a responsible attitude to getting to her next class on time.
Oh, you think you're finished, do you?
I've done all the problems, yes.
Well, in that case, you can pack your things up and sit quietly until everyone else is finished.
But Miss...
She suggested to Anita that she should be the one to explain to Mr. Brooks why the class was late.
Well, perhaps you're the best person to explain to Mr. Brooks why you're late.
Even though the bell had gone and pupils would certainly be late for the next lesson, Kath directed them to work for 2 more minutes to finish their task. She suggested that most of the class were not close to finishing their work, and that those who had finished would probably have completed it to an unsatisfactory standard. While pupils hurried to try to finish, Kath issued a confused and contradictory instruction about homework, which she did not give the class an opportunity to clarify.
Your homework will be to answer the questions from the worksheet on my desk, and I expect you to have done all of them. Understood?
Her question was rhetorical. There seemed to be no routine relating to the homework sheet that Kath had prepared. Mrs. Latimer was unable to follow the plan established for Billy, and he remained in his seat. This made it likely that he would not be able to get to his next lesson without facing the crowded corridor. The atmosphere in the classroom was tense, and tempers were frayed.
Watching this lesson confirms for me that we are right to be working on lesson endings. The consequences of a lesson ending like this are serious. Without a plenary, pupils do not have the opportunity to summarise and consolidate the learning that has taken place in the lesson.
Yes, Anita.
Can we go if we've finished?
Oh, you think you're finished, do you?
I've done all the problems, yes.
Well, in that case, you can pack your things up and sit quietly until everyone else is finished.
But Miss, it's history next and Mr. Brooks hates if we're late.
Does he indeed? Well, perhaps you're the best person to explain to Mr. Brooks why you're late.
This class will have arrived at the next lesson late, angry and irritable, and the teacher will have struggled to start on time. I'm concerned that Kath is not considering her colleagues, particularly Mr. Brooks, who may now experience some difficulties at the start of his lessons with APT. He has expressed concerns about the late arrival and poor attitude of this class to his head of department on a number of occasions, and the situation has not yet been resolved. Kath was not modelling the respectful and responsible behaviour that I expect from staff and pupils in this school. Anita seemed to be the sensible one here, yet her question and comment were greeted with sarcasm. I'm concerned that, in the future, some pupils might choose not to attend school in order to avoid Kath's lessons.
I'll give you 2 more minutes to finish off. If you haven't finished, which means most of you, your homework will be to complete it properly. If you have finished and think that I'll be satisfied with what you've done, your homework will be to answer the questions from the worksheet on my desk. And
I'm not surprised that Kath has such a low return of homework. Her muddled instructions and rhetorical questions made it likely that very few pupils would be successful in the task. Mrs. Latimer must have found this situation very difficult. Kath knew that Billy's plan allows him to leave lessons 2 minutes before the bell. By extending the end of the lesson in this way, Billy would have been upset by the disruption to his routine and the congested corridor. Mrs. Latimer will have had to settle him before he could manage the next lesson. Mr. Dillon will complain that Billy's plan is not being followed, with all the repercussions of that for his education.
I'll give you 2 more minutes to finish off.
I need to discuss these issues with Kath to make sure her lessons finish with a clear plenary, on time, and that her pupils are dismissed calmly. and with a positive attitude. We need to identify what Kath needs to help her improve these aspects of her teaching.
Your homework will be to answer the questions from the worksheet on my desk.
The atmosphere at the end of the lesson was not conducive to learning, but Kath still insisted that pupils continued with the task set. It was obvious from their demeanour and facial expressions that learning was not taking place. Few pupils were focused on task, and levels of anxiety were high. Kath decided not to hold a plenary to summarise learning and set homework. I think she used this time to compose herself following the earlier incident with Jason, and also to punish pupils for what she perceived as lack of effort and poor behaviour during the lesson.
Anita,
Can we go if we've finished?
oh, you think you're finished, do you?
I've done all the problems, yes.
Well, in that case, you can pack your things up and sit quietly until everyone else is finished.
But Miss, it's history next and Mr. Brooks hates if we're late.
Does he indeed? Well, perhaps you're the best person to explain to Mr. Brooks why you're late.
This action also unfortunately punished her colleagues and those pupils like Anita who remained focused on the task throughout the lesson. Kath is well aware of the importance of plenaries, especially in a lesson like this where some pupils appear to be lost or behind. She should have left enough time to set homework tasks. As it is, her instructions for homework conflicted with her previous instruction for pupils to hurry up and finish their work.
If you haven't finished, which means most of you, your homework will be to complete it properly. If you have finished and think that I'll be satisfied with what you've done, your homework will be to answer the questions from the worksheet on my desk, and I expect you to have done all of them. Understood?
The class was in a double bind. Should they finish their work or listen to the homework instructions? Conflicting messages such as these can leave pupils feeling anxious and confused and lead to rising noise levels as they seek clarification and reassurance from each other. Actually, there was little incentive for pupils to finish the task, as those who hadn't finished could finish it for homework, and those who had finished received an extension task. There are many structural changes that Kath could make to improve the lesson ending. For example, giving her instructions for homework clearly without negative clauses. I do feel, however, that structural changes will have little impact on the quality of teaching and learning in Kath's lessons unless she appreciates the fundamental importance of developing positive relationships with the pupil she teaches.
Can we go if we've finished?
I cannot see Kath responding well to advice about how to do this from her colleagues or from others. She feels she is a successful teacher. If Kath's practice is to change, she will need to realise for herself the importance of the effective side of teaching. One possible way of taking this forward would be to try to develop a relationship on a more personal level so that we can talk through some of the issues, and I can begin to understand the barriers to changing practice and developing new skills that Kath might be facing.